So, welcome everyone. I started doing a strange thing around 2007. That was the year that Carlo Felice Cillario died. He'd given his last concert in Sydney in 2003, and we were all very sad to hear of his death. It felt like the end of an era, and from today's perspective, I think it was. And in Carlo's last years, he used to bring things and share them with people in Sydney, things about himself. He had a series of memoirs that he'd written about the various people that he'd worked with over the years, and they were all typed full of mistakes in Italian. Many of you knew Carlo, and imagine him with a typewriter. So the memoirs, some of the people might surprise you that he wrote about. One was Arturo Toscanini, Maria Callas, Wilhelm Backhaus, Tito Gobbi, Walter Gieseking, William Capel, David Oistrakh, Elena Suliotis, Friedrich Gulbe, Sir John Barbarolli, Franco Corelli, Montserrat Caballé, Renata Tebaldi, Evita Peron, and then Joan Sutherland, Benito Mussolini, Pavarotti, Giacomo Aragal, Jose Carreras, Placido Domingo, Joseph Cripps, Pablo Casals, a whole lot of people. He knew them all, he worked with them all, and he had some pretty dreadful things to say about lots of them. He also wrote two memoirs. One was called Australia, which was a place that he absolutely loved. And then there was a piece he wrote called Gli Aborigini e loro bel canto, the Aborigines and their bel canto. It was interesting that when Carlo first arrived in Australia, he said, where are the indigenous singers? You know, this is a new opera company, a new land. You should be putting indigenous singers into the opera company, and nobody wanted to go near that one. He was interested in it to the extent that he undertook a 6-week trip all around different settlements. A lady from Elder University in Adelaide sort of organised the trip for him with Peter Hemmings, and he went round. He was fascinated. For Carlo, every nation had their own idea of bel canto, beautiful singing, and of course the Italian one's the only right one, of course. But he was fascinated to know why the First Nations peoples sang the way they did. And he wrote, this is the results of his 6 weeks travelling around. It's a very, very long memoir. I didn't publish either of them because Carlo had a dreadful sense of humour, and even people who he hugely admired, like Joan Sutherland, who he described as una vaca placida, a placid old cow, he just sent everybody up, and I don't think anybody could publish. It's a shame, I think, because I think at the time he wrote them, they wouldn't. He meant no offence. You know, he just had this particular filter by which he understood the world. But today it would be a problem. So anyway, there were the memoirs, which I finally translated them, and they're included in an appendix to the book, in the book. And then there was some compositions that he wrote. He was a very serious composer when he was young, and then after he got into the wicked world of opera, as he described it, he became less serious about being a composer. But in old age, he got back to it again when he was less busy with the opera company, and there was a company up in Brookvale, and they had an early version, I think, of Sibelius, and he went up there and he was able to use the computer, and he actually wrote a couple of compositions on this computer program, and his use of it was about as good as his use of the typewriter, and I included 2 of those songs in the appendix to the book. Then there was a very strange cassette which he handed copies out to various people. So as you will see, Carlo was a really noted violinist during the 1930s. He was one of Italy's leading violinists. And in the late 30s, he made some recordings for HMV, which in Italy was known as La Voce del Padrone. There's about 12 sides that he made, and they've never ever been re-released. And I've sent them around to a lot of people, including some really noted violinists, and they all said these things deserve to be heard. So there's another appendix, and there's a URL in the appendix, and if you enter that into your search engine or whatever it's called, somewhere deep in Sydney University, they are all I uploaded all these. I had them restored and uploaded into a repository, and you can hear them. And you'll hear one today if the technology continues to be my friend. The quality of the recordings, nobody has found any other copies of the 78 records. Carlo didn't have any, but his sister had them all. And the cassette that I got, she had a cassette player and a microphone, and she put them on her gramophone and held the thing, and that's how she recorded them for him. At a certain point in one of them, she drops the microphone, but then she picks it up. But in spite of all that, and look, what else would one expect of Carlo? In spite of all of that, this is beautiful, extraordinary playing. There was all of that material. And so there were a few things that from 2007 kept me thinking it would be really nice to do some sort of a little tribute volume to him, some sort of a little book. And I kept thinking about it and putting it off. But there was one thing that kept me going, and it was that. So that appeared in the newspaper. That's 1998. And it's actually the dress rehearsal for one of the concerts in the Domain. So by 1998, Carlo was 83 years old, and he was generally in good health, but sometimes in performances you felt that the energy was waning, and then he'd get it back again. And so I remember this particular day. It was the dress rehearsal. He was sitting on the side of the huge stage that they built in the Domain. And he just looked like this sort of little old man who you know, was somebody's grandfather, and he actually was as well. But you had this idea, how on earth is he going to get up and conduct this huge thing in front of him? And he sort of waddled over to the stage and was there, and the orchestra were a bit, and then it was the overture to Forza del Destino with those opening ba, ba, ba. And all of a sudden, when he heard the brass do that, he was somehow transfixed and transformed, and it was the most amazing performance of that work that I can imagine. And at the end of it, the orchestra and everybody was like, what the hell was that? And the evening performance was also incredibly good, but it was that dress rehearsal where and he had that ability at certain times just to switch it on. And that was his great strength. That photograph represents all of that. To me, it also represents the time when I and maybe a number of the people who were closer to Carlo, this was the time when we knew him. And he was always a fiery character. Now, I'm going to try and go to the next slide. And this is where the moment of truth comes. So maybe Jay Wu from the stage or Kath from the side stage, you've seen this side of Carlo, but other people who experienced him from the audience may not have seen what he was like in the pit. And it is something extraordinary. This, as you can see, I think it says 1996. This is a couple of years earlier. He's 81 years old, and you'll see him walk into the pit. He hated the fact that he had to wear glasses, so he would always enter the pit without the glasses on and then put them on. And I won't say anymore, I'll just let you watch it.